Welcome everyone. I'm so excited to see you all on this nice warm spring day, at least very warm where I am. And I'm very happy to be here today with Barbara Locke, Managing Editor of Variant Lit. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So as always, people attending, tuning in, you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into the chat and I will work the questions into the conversation with Barbara. So let's jump right in. Do you want to tell us the history of Variant Lit? When was it founded? And tell us how you got involved and when you got involved with the magazine.
Um, Variant Lit was founded. I'm not even sure. Many years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, I got involved in 2020 in the summer, or maybe it was about the summer of 2020. And I just started out as a reader. I was brought in by Kaylin Livernois, who was the managing editor until very recently. And she brought me in as a reader. It was the tradition of variant literature to give even readers the title of editor and to bring them into editing responsibilities very, very quickly, usually within a single issue's time course. And the structure was also very flat, and it still is. We have it such that we can all read the comments of each other, and even very new readers come in as a level 3 editor in terms of the submittable sort of access, so that it's a very flat structure, and people get a lot of access. So I came on as a reader, an editor, and just started working the fiction queue, and then moved over into the nonfiction queue, basically because there was a need. And it just sort of, things just sort of moved. There was opportunity, and you just do it, and all of a sudden there you do,
Yeah.
there you have it.
Sure. So when you say a flat structure, can you tell us what that means? Is that sort of non-hierarchical? Is that what you're...
Yeah, I mean, there is some hierarchy, but it's relatively flat, meaning that when we assign stories or poems to readers, it's not first one person reads it, and then once yes, it moves up to the next level, and then it moves up to the next level, and then it moves up to the next level. No, it's really only 2 levels. And everybody has the chance to all of the editors are assigned all of the readers and editors, because they're all the same, are assigned all of the stories or poems in the final round, and everybody has a chance to revise or comment. It's a relatively flat structure.
Okay. We have a question. Great. How would you describe the ethos/tone of Variant, or what is the mission of the magazine?
We publish work that has a certain spiritual resonance. And when I mean spiritual resonance, I'm not really talking about religion. I'm talking about that sort of like extra vibe thing, that sort of metaphor that you can't quite put your finger on, but it can be accessed by just sort of noticing the object, noticing the style and the tone. We're looking for that sort of higher level extra content in our published work.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard many editors talk about like the spiritual dimension of literature, but I take it you don't mean religious, and you don't mean like explicitly about spirituality, but there's something. Can you say it sounds like it's probably hard to put your finger on and to sort of
I could probably get
yeah.
around it. I I teach at a couple of different institutions, and I was actually thinking to myself yesterday, I was teaching the medical students at Columbia, And I thought to myself, am I going to get into this today? I'm like, no, it's too hard for them. But maybe I can do it today for you all because everybody here is interested in writing, and it's not they're here on by choice. What we're looking for, this idea of spirituality, is that extra level of that sort of you might call the sub that thing you can't name. That's what metaphor does. What metaphor does is it allows you to get at meaning that cannot be put into words, that cannot be explained plainly. If you try to explain plainly the idea of what's a metaphor that I saw recently that I liked? I don't know. There's a song, I suppose, life is a highway. So life is a highway. So how is life like a highway? Well, a highway is long. There are exits that you can crash your car. Somebody might help you when you have a flat tire. There are signs. Sometimes you get lost. So by we like to have that extra level of meaning that can come, that you can't put into words plainly, but you can access it if you sort of notice the vibe of the syntax and the objects that are sort of shimmering in the story.
That's really interesting. So can you identify a difference between like a really good extended metaphor? Let's say like the life is a highway. That's a really good kind of extended metaphor, and we can look at all the similarities between life and highways. But what would elevate that to like a spiritual
most important thing. So yeah, the metaphor in a story is probably is rarely stated. So what we would see if we see it, sometimes the writers don't even know that they've written it, and then but when we like, whoa, look what's in this story. And it's rarely stated, rarely stated. So in a high quality work of and this can be fiction or nonfiction, and sometimes even and often even in poetry, but there you can imagine the writer choosing certain syntax. They have an idea in mind as they're writing the story, and they might not be able to express it to the editor, but the editor can see what's in the story. Oh, look, I'll give you an example. In the most recent issue, we have a story by Elliot Lee called Wild Kiba Siko Mushrooms. And in that story, there's a whole bunch of objects that just keep popping up around this idea of consent. And I won't spell out the metaphor because that'll like ruin its magic. We were able to see in that story that there was something really special going on. And we were able to sort of support that little fledgling metaphor to sort of fulfill its spiritual duty of like getting at that thing that's really hard to say.
So interesting. So do you feel like your magazine serves like an especially important purpose now? I feel like there's a kind of, this is just my own postulating, but there seems to be like a spiritual hunger out there. There's sort of like a lot of us, we're all on computers all the time, now we're all worried about like AI and all this stuff. And there it seems like, I mean, there's always a need for some spiritual dimension in our lives, but it seems like now we're constantly so engaged with computer that it seems like particularly vital.
Yes. I think there is I think during the pandemic and even preceding the pandemic, but wow, not that it's fully over, not that people aren't still affected, because I know that they are. But that was like a pretty dark depth for us for a while as a world. There was a great spiritual malaise
Mm.
Uh, and we're all starting to sort of claw our way up from that sort of pit of like, why are we here? What is our purpose? If I do everything right, am I still going to be locked in my house or risk death or die? Or, look what happens to my loved ones. Look what's happening to my, experience at my job. And what's the point of all this? Like,
Mm.
how do we fill ourselves up when
Mm.
we can't even be in a room with each other? So that was a nadir. But
Mhm.
we're clawing ourselves our way out. And I think a lot of people, certainly I do. I have my main job is as a physician, and there's a lot of human interaction, but there's also a lot of um, sort of expectation of conformity to rigid, practice pathways, right?
Mhm.
So there, I needed the writing, and I needed the art, and and what is it that art brings us? It brings us that thing you can't put into words.
Mhm.
Art brings us that thing you can't put into words. No one's going to say that your art, maybe some will say they won't publish your art, and maybe they might say that they don't like it. But nobody can tell you that your art doesn't have value to you.
Mhm.
And that's really important. That's
Mhm.
a very, very important thing
That's
for us
lovely.
to all. Yeah.
Sure. So it's not every day that I talk to editors who are also physicians. So it's really interesting. Do you have any connection with Bellevue Literary Review? Because I know they do like work in the hospital. They're like a teaching magazine for the hospital there. Do you have any association with those editors or that magazine at all? Or
I don't. I've submitted there, and
okay.
but I haven't been published there. I know some of the people that are affiliated with the magazine, or someone on the board, and I know many writers who have published there, and um, but we don't. I don't have a formal relationship with Bellevue.
Got it. Sure. So returning to your magazine, so let's just cover the basics. Can you tell us what genres you publish, how often the magazine comes out, print or online, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we are 100% online. The magazine, the variant literature is a press, and we do publish chapbooks and full-length books as well, mostly poetry, and we have some prose. Um, but the magazine is fully online. It's quarterly. We publish 4 times a year. And related to that, we are only open for, a month at a time for each genre. Be, we just move on. We look at the work that's sent in, and we make a decision about it, usually within 2 to 5 weeks. Occasionally if it's 8 weeks, that means it's getting a lot of attention. And we publish poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and we also publish a little bit of art. And within fiction, in terms of genre, within fiction, we publish anything that shimmers. It can be, someone can send us a Western, and we would publish it if it does all the stuff we wanted to do. Yeah.
So can you take us through your editorial process? I noticed you have a humongous staff, a ton of poetry readers, and it sounds like everyone reads everything. So how does that work? A submission comes in, and then what happens next?
So a submission comes in. We actually have a whole new bunch of readers this quarter. So it until this most recent quarter, I guess I would call that winter. We People would just go in on their own and read on their own, and the poetry on the poetry side, the poetry and the sort of like senior level readers or editors would just sort of fill in the gaps. This Now that we have so many people, everybody is getting assigned. They're getting assigned a set, and then if there is a maybe or a yes vote on anything, it gets a second read. And if it gets and this is approximately the same for prose as well, um, only a senior level editor would make a decision about a declination, and everything that's in that sort of like higher level category of, this is solid work. I could see this being published. We could publish it if we felt like it fit in our final like decision period.
Mm.
All of those pieces in all the genres, in each of the genres, are reassigned to everybody so that everybody gets a chance at the end to comment on the final 20 to 40 pieces in each genre, of which maybe 10 to 6 are published.
Okay. And so what are you seeing trends in what is being submitted to the magazine?
Um, let's see. Am I seeing trends? I see trends of the nonfiction. In the nonfiction queue, what I see is a trend of women writers and some non-binary writers giving us work that is really wonderful and challenging in a way that perhaps they might not. I'm not sure that they're sending it elsewhere. It's like I feel like we're a little bit of a safe space for a certain type of writing. And trying to think what else. Other than that, I'm not really seeing a particular trend right now.
Are there things that you see in submissions that you sort of have a red flag for, like, oh no, this person is doing this again, like another Western genre or something that you just
No,
like?
if you give us a Western genre, I will read it, especially if it does that extra stuff. I'll tell you what makes us say, or at least me, and also another senior editor, say, oh no. And that is if the story starts out passive. And what I mean by passive is that it starts with exposition, or it starts with a very passive set of actions. For example, sitting, drinking, or thinking. If the story has world building, and please send us all the worlds, we'll take any world, but it's got to start with some activity, some action, some verbs, some scene work. That's what really gets us excited. And we're like, oh, this is we're having an experience here,
Mm.
reading something, and we're in that story with the writer.
Yeah. Do you have any advice? It sounds like you teach writing as well. So if a writer notices that they have a story where the character, it just starts out with them taking a walk and they're in their head and they're thinking about what happened, do you have any suggestions for how they could liven it up and start the story more in a more interesting way?
Yep, sure. The I do this too. I write stories. When you first start to write a story, you might give yourself the freedom to just write whatever comes out of your head. And if it turns out later that you find the exposition, you deal with it later. But in your first attempt at writing a story, don't put any barriers to your flow. Let it all come out, and then you take it and you put it in a little drawer. You put it in your file, and you say, I'm not going to look at that thing for 3 weeks. And then you open it up and you look at it and you say, oh, I almost forgot what the story was about. Oh, this is interesting to me. This is interesting. Well, if it's interesting to you, it's probably going to be interesting to your reader. I once wrote a story where a man sat in a pizza place drinking a cup of coffee and thought about how bored he was. And then I put that story away in a drawer, and then I opened it up later. I'm like, why would anybody want to read a story about a man drinking coffee and thinking about how bored he is? So then what you do is you just start going through and like, well, there's nothing going on here. Oh, look, on the top of page 3, that's when there's some activity, there's some action, there's some verbs. And I'm not saying everybody has to jump out of airplanes, but you'll be able to tell. But you might not be able to tell when you first write it, or if you look at it on day 3, you might only see it if you sort of put it away and then you look
Yeah.
at it again and you're like, oh, my story starts on page 3. And then you just started on page 3.
Sure. And do you similarly have any advice for writers if they're I find what you're saying about the spiritual dimension and sort of making your work shimmer. I find that really interesting. So do you have any advice for writers who are like, huh, that's cool. How can I go back and sort of add that shimmery element to my work? Is there something concrete that you can
Yeah,
point to?
actually there is. There's something very concrete. This is a I've heard this. This was taught to me, but perhaps I didn't process it um, the in the way it was intended, and I kind of had to relearn it for myself. Um, and that is that your writing will you when you write, you will naturally find yourself um, concentrating on certain objects. And when here I'm talking about parts of the sentence, you know, nouns
Mhm.
and or concepts like here's an object, it's freedom, here's another object, it's a key, and here's another object, it's a recipe. And what are all these things doing in my story? I don't know, but some of these things keep on popping up over and over again in the same story. And when you one of the things you can do to make your short story shimmer is to sort of take an inventory of your own objects. You you know you take your little Word file and you go into your own little review tab and you make little comments on your own story, or you can print it out and do it by hand. You say, oh, look at this object, and oh, here's another object, and look, this one and this one, they relate to each other, look at that.
Hmm.
And you just sort of think about what your objects are, and then pretty soon, especially if you practice it, you can even practice it on published writing from other people, you'll start to notice that the objects relate to each other, and then all of a sudden a metaphor will suggest itself
Hmm.
to you. And then you'll say, oh, parenthood is a prison, or something crazy like that, right?
Hmm.
And and then you'll see what's already, you take an inventory of what's already in your story, and then you write more related to that in a way that is interesting to you as the writer.
Hmm.
And hopefully if it's interesting to you, it'll be interesting to other people.
That's so interesting. It almost sounds like a therapeutic process too, because you're sort of examining what's in your subconscious, what you didn't know that you were putting on the page, and then trying to bring it to the surface and identify patterns and make it more deliberate.
Yes, you see what you already have.
Yeah.
And this is what when you're in workshop, if you're really lucky and you've got a good group, or you have you're in a writing group, or you have a teacher who is able to manage and is able to sort of instruct people in this way. That's one of the most important things that um, a writing group or a colleague can help you with, which is to say, just to tell you what you have, what they see, not to tell you what to fix. Maybe they will eventually, and maybe you're going to be like, oh no, don't tell me what to fix. But if they can at least tell you what they see,
Yeah.
what is it that you have? What have you given me?
Right.
What you've given me, that is that's valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I worked with an editor recently on a story, and he pointed out to me that I used the word gray 8 times on one page. So again, it's just something I would have never picked that up. But it's just like noticing patterns that you're not even aware, you're putting into your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you work with writers on revising their work?
I do. We do. In fact, I see Tessa Rossi just popped in too. She is an associate managing editor. Hi, Tessa. Um, at Variant, we do a lot of, we tend to offer revisions more often than not. I would say probably 60 to 80% of the prose gets edited beyond copy edits.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes it's as little as a couple of observations about the objects that are in the story, and a recommendation to the writer to consider amplifying something or another thing, and they do all the primary writing and the syntax, and sometimes it's like, this, your story starts on page 3 and we're going to cut this. I hope you don't mind, and so yeah. And as a writer and someone who submits, and I haven't had that level of editing, and so I know that it might be unusual or a surprise sometimes to people that we offer that.
It's great. So what makes a piece like you're going to accept it with revision, conditional upon revision, versus it's not going to be accepted?
We somebody has, like, I'm getting a little feedback on the thing.
Yeah, if everyone could just make sure they're muted, because there's a weird echo coming through.
That's okay. There is, we've tried it a number of different ways. If people send us something that we're concerned we might not get a revision that'll work, we will sometimes offer a revision process in advance of accepting. Meaning that if the revision is just like, it's just not going to get there, then we let it go, and that is we've done that, and we've probably done that maybe 5 times since I started. More often what we'll say to people is, you'll be assigned an editor who will offer you some edits. And occasionally we get people who say, I really didn't expect this. And
I'm sorry, can I just ask Christy Fountain to mute?
I think I'm looking at, there's like a duplicate.
Yeah. Christy, can you mute your other account?
I think it's all set now.
Thanks.
Yes.
It looks like it's not muted and it was still.
Yeah, I think there was something weird going on. There was a duplicate,
Okay.
but I think the echo is gone. And okay. Sorry about that, Barbara. Carry on.
And we've had writers say, you know what, this isn't what I wanted. I didn't want for my piece to be changed in any way. And then we have to decide if we're going to publish it or if we're going to say, okay, well, you can withdraw. And so far we've published everything that people say no thank you on, but we're a little bit more upfront about our editing process. Sort of become, this is the way we do it. How does that sound to you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there something that you're actively looking for in submissions that you'd like to see more of, that maybe people don't know that you published something and you would,
We are actively looking for more fiction to be submitted by women and non-binary writers, and we are actively looking for more nonfiction to be submitted by men and non-binary writers. We are.
Yeah. And so I saw in the About section that Variant Lit works to maintain relationships with contributors and readers. Can you talk about that? Like, how do you sustain? I know it's sort of come up like in the literary community, like do editors and writers have the same relationships that they used to have, in the good old days? And I was sort of heartened to see that in your About section. It sounds like that's something that you actually work to maintain, is that like connection between contributor and editor. So can you talk about that?
I'm trying to think of a way to describe it. I guess social media is one of the ways that we maintain connections. We try to notice when our writers are publishing. We certainly want to be advised when they have something wonderful coming out, like a book. We tweet and retweet. We quote tweet sometimes. We do that at the level of the magazine, but also the individual editors do that. And we definitely encourage submissions from writers who've submitted to us before. We have There's lots of writers, lots of writers. If you get a personalized or tiered declination from Variant Lit, like we really do want to read some more of what you're sending us.
That's great.
And yeah.
Mhm. And how do you see Variant Lit sort of distinguishing itself? I know we all know there are thousands of literary magazines. So what makes Variant Lit its own special place?
I think it has to do with this idea that we can find literary merit in the kind of work that other people might think is non-conforming.
Mm.
And we work with writers to, you know, to turn what they have, which is already beautiful, into that sort of like next level sort of shimmering object, that sort of that luminous, light filled, sort of sublime. You know, if I can be so bold as to say that we do that.
Sure. And so if somebody wanted to find out more about the magazine, if they looked at your most recent issue, is that a good sampling, or is
We
every
have
issue?
great work. We have great work in our most recent issue. Rachel Ide is here. Hi, Rachel. And she published with us, I think it was 2 years ago almost. Was it 2 years ago?
I think so, yeah.
She has a great story called The Water Tower, and we submitted that to a couple of award nominations. Definitely recommend that you read her story. A Siren Fall by Emma Brousseau. There's a mermaid in that story, and we think it has fantastic literary merit. And we also we nominated that for Best American Science Fiction.
Oh, nice.
Sound the Bones by Camille Adams in Winter is an excellent piece. It's nonfiction. Peace Process by Barbara Beyer. This issue I would recommend reading. And also the piece by Elliot Lee, Wild KB, I can't even say it, Wild Kibasico Mushrooms. Wonderful.
That's great.
We've got a lot of wonderful work.
Yeah. And a question here, can you speak to the press? Is it open for submissions for chapbooks, and do you take prose?
We do take prose, but the windows, I believe, are, I think we just, I can't, I'll have to double check on that. My recollection is that we closed a while ago for the poetry, and we will be opening for prose, but there's some, how do I put it? Structural sort of like process issues that have to be figured out on the back end. So I'm not sure about that.
Sure. Can you tell us about your contests?
Sure. My what?
Yeah, the writing contests.
Oh, we had a writing contest last year. Other than that, we haven't repeated it. We actually, the writing contest we had was called the Pizza Prize. It was really fun. We thought it was such a great idea to give people a pizza. You know, we weren't going to like, and there was going to be 2 pizzas. It was going to be one pizza for the person who, you know, won the prize, and it was going to be one for somebody that they admired. So there was going to be this sort of talk about like linking to each other and supporting each other. You know, the winner was going to get a pizza for themselves, and they had to send a pizza to another writer that they admired. That was it. We didn't continue that. We had a great judge. It was Aram Rajoyan, who is an editor at Guernica. But we discontinued it because it was a lot of like, you know, accounting, like, you know, like who gets what and where does it go, and who, you know, how do we pay for this pizza in this city and that pizza in that city, and it became like too hard to actually administer.
Right, right.
So we decided, like let's just publish great fiction as we go
Yeah,
along.
yeah, that's great. So when are you open for your next round of submissions? And is there anything writers, so okay, I see Tessa's putting right now, you're open now for submissions.
Right, thank you.
Anything
Yeah.
writers should know, apart from, thinking about getting their work to that shimmery shimmery place, anything they should know, or should they just send their work?
Um, they should just send their work. Um, there's, I would never discourage somebody from sending something that they think is ready, because we have the capacity to, if it's like has a certain shape
Mhm.
and it feels like a gap, like, we can't publish 9 stories about witches, but if there's something about the story that is almost there and it fills a gap, we can work with a writer to get it to that place,
Mhm.
even if it's not quite there.
Yeah.
We're open now for prose, that's fiction and nonfiction. When we're open next month, that's May, for poetry
Okay.
and art. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we take a while, we process stuff and we produce the issue.
Okay, so it looks like fiction and nonfiction until the end of April.
Yeah, fiction and nonfiction till the end of April, and then poetry is in May.
Okay, sounds great. I mean, you have a very fast response time, and you work with writers to revise their work. Those are pretty like golden golden attributes in the literary world.
Yeah.
How many submissions do you get per cycle?
This has been rising every month, so I'm not sure where we're going to land this month. We get more than 300 submissions per quarter for fiction, and maybe not quite 200 submissions for I had these numbers. I submitted them to our team. I just can't remember what they are. Anyway, it's more than 300 and almost 200. It could be 350 of fiction, and about a little bit more than half of that for nonfiction each quarter. So there are fewer submissions in nonfiction than there are in fiction.
Okay. And if somebody's listening to this, watching this, thinking this sounds great, they'd love to get involved, are you looking for readers?
We just added a whole new host of readers. We hope to keep them engaged, and I'm sure there will be sort of movement as things happen in people's lives. And when we are looking for readers, we will put something out on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay, and we have a question here. How many poetry submissions do you tend to get?
Wow, it's a lot. I feel like I should not pause to look it up, because again, I sent it all out to our team, but I don't have it off the top of my head. It's a lot. More than the fiction. It's a lot of poetry.
Okay. And so one final question, this is something I ask all editors, is sort of like, what keeps you doing this? It sounds like you have a lot going on. You're a physician, you're a parent, you're, a writer yourself. So what keeps you from burnout? What keeps you excited about editing a literary magazine? Why do it, and why this magazine in particular?
Well, this magazine in particular, because this is where the opportunity was. There's a path. People are on their life is a highway, and this was my and that's
your rest
right?
area.
So there wasn't a lot of like planning involved. It was just like a wow, here I am. And I love I really like looking at submissions. I really love working with the other editors and the individual writers. We have sessions for they're all volunteer. I'm a volunteer, 100% volunteer. We have little sessions for our readers, our editors, about what we're looking for, and it turns into kind of like almost like a little teaching session. There's a little bit of a social aspect to it over Zoom, and I also learn a lot. I learn a lot about when you read, I used to read for Uncharted magazine. And so that year, or it was more than a year, it was about a year and 3 months or something. When I was reading for both magazines, I think I read something like, I don't know, 1,000 manuscripts. Could have been more than 1,000 manuscripts in a year. And then then you're like, wait a second, I can tell by page 4 what is going to happen in the story, or if I have the stamina, if I can. And so you learn a lot about your own writing, your tastes, but also the structure of stories, and then you start to look at your own writing and say, okay, no one's going to put up with all this like explaining you're doing, so you better get rid of that stuff and put the right reader in scene. And I'm like, okay, thanks self for telling me that again. And so I find it very stimulating. And we also have it structured so that we have a break. Like we do one thing, we do another thing, we prepare the magazine, we repeat. And we don't have it's not like this, like, there's like a movement to the activity. We're not like doing the same thing all the time.
Yeah, makes sense. Actually, we have one more question. Is hybrid a thing? Do you publish hybrid works?
We love hybrid work. Sometimes we'll get flash fiction or flash nonfiction, and we'll say we think this is a poem, and then we tag our poetry readers or editors and say, "Is this a poem? You want this?" And sometimes we'll get something in the poetry side, and they'll say, "We think this is flash. Do you want to read it?" And so there's a lot of back and forth. And if something doesn't sort of fit nicely, but it does the thing, it does that thing, then we don't care what it's called. We figure out what it's.
Is that the shimmering?
Yeah, sparkles.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Go submit. They're open now, so get on it, or get on it next month for poetry. And thank you so much, Barbara. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you so much, Becky, for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.